Hello, good afternoon, welcome. Thank you very much for coming along to another one of these Fotospeed Talks. I am here to give you the world's shortest introduction because this lady needs no introduction. We have the Dragon in the building, the longest established Fotospeed ambassador in the world. And that is my introduction. So without any further ado, we'll enjoy this fantastic talk and look at some wonderful photos and hear more from Margaret Salisbury. So please, a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. You don't have to clap now. You can clap after if you're any good, and I might not be, so never mind. I put this talk together, okay with the mic. I put this talk together to actually show my attitude to monochrome photography. So I put that up there because I am called the Dragon, and I do a lot of monochrome prints, but I started off my photographic life in the darkroom. And when I was only about 2 years into photography, I went to a horse fair and I saw in a pen all together a whole load of ponies, all with the labels removed from their rumps. And I knew that that meant that whole pen of ponies was going to be taken to France and killed for meat. It was purchased by one buyer. And I discovered they were so wet and looked so miserable and crammed in so tightly. I thought that was the epitome of misery. And it was that moment that I discovered you can put an emotion into photography. And I have to say, that was the day pictorial photography for me was born. And I've always believed that it's not what you see, it's what you feel about what you see and what you think you've seen rather than what's actually there. But you can go from the sublime to ridiculous. You can take pictures that actually they're very, very bright. That's a very, very bright image in brilliant colours. But also, when you convert it mentally into monochrome, you can see that the range of tones is also very good. This was taken at an event, and this was in a temple, and these statues were in the temple. And as far as I'm concerned, that picture is printed on burrito paper, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the only paper that really will show off black and white to a great extent. However, it does depend greatly on the subject. You can go to the other extreme. Instead of a strong black and white and very high contrast, you can take another picture, and this is Venice Carnival, and this was one of the carnival people. And she had an amazing headdress with ballet dancers in the top. But this is Bacchus, the god of wine. And what I saw was the contrast in this beautiful woman with a statue of the guy in complete contrast to the two parts of the subject. This is another one, which is, in a way, a moving picture. This was an event abroad, and it was a dance. But it was a dance, and this guy was the devil dancer. And because he's got a completely black background, and I didn't put that artificially, it's not cut out, it's a straight image actually, because it was actually taken at 10 o'clock at night when the sky was completely black, and therefore you can get completely black and background, which is not intrusive to the image. And actually that dance was done by a whole load of men, and for a solid hour they did this stamping dance with their arms and their feet, making the most powerful sound you can imagine. Because I'm disabled, I was allowed to sit right at the front, and I was literally within feet of this subject. And you can see there that the sky is pretty dark, even there's a little bit of light in the sky at that point. But this is the sort of subject I think gives the impact, perhaps, of monochrome. This is another picture, and this one gives an exact opposite impression. I think you can put more drama and more feeling into a picture. If you print that in monochrome or in colour, which I should have done actually, but it's a very attractive picture. She was wearing very bright clothes. It was a pretty picture, but converted to black and white and it becomes very somber and very sad. And actually, because the lady was actually in tears, praying inside a temple, and I felt that it suited monochrome because it gives more of the emotion at the time. If you go into landscape photography, or in my case, mostly seascape, can we get someone to take those down? Thank you. Yes, take those down. This is a wave, and this is taken where I live. I actually live a quarter of a mile from the sea. I would never live away from the sea. I can actually hear and smell the sea from my garden. And I swim in the sea from May to November, much to everybody's utter amazement. But what they don't realise is the sea doesn't lose its temperature. It's the air that gets damn cold. And when you come out of the sea in December, it's pretty bumming awful. So this is printed again on Burita. And Burita is a shiny paper. And I believe that if you analyse the subject that you're taking, it's not difficult to choose the paper that you print on, because water is wet and wet shines. So if you've got a gloss or a slight gloss, then it suits a wet subject more than perhaps a dry subject. And it's the way I've always believed that you can choose the paper and you can actually enhance the image as you do. But this is my favourite sea picture. This was actually taken in Mexico, in Baja California. And I watched this bird standing there for a long time. When I walk into the sea, I walk in with my arms out until the waves roll over my shoulders and over my arms. And I feel that the sea is coming to meet me, and I've come to embrace the sea. And that bird's just stood there, letting the waves roll over his feet, and sometimes the larger waves actually right up to the top of its legs. And I know how that bird feels, which may sound very silly to you, but that is actually my reaction to that sort of image and that sort of subject. This is now into landscape, but I'm more specifically going to show you landscape in the form of trees. And that tree is, to me, lending itself totally to monochrome. Why do I say that? Because that's not a monochrome print. That's a colour print. And that is the only colour in it, is a tiny little warm tones here and there. It actually obeys the rules. And I don't very often obey the rules, so I've got to prove that I do occasionally obey the rules. It's not the rule of thirds, it's the rule of the golden mean, which is 5/8 and 3/8. And that tree is on the intersection at the correct place. But I believe diagonal lines give a dynamic feel to the picture. So you've got these lines of plants, but I particularly like the shadow coming down there. How did I take that picture? Well, if you walk around in the snow, you disturb the snow. So how do you get it with pristine snow? I'll tell you how you get it. You get it from leaning out of the end of the hot air balloon with your husband hanging onto the waistband of your trousers, shouting, "Will you come back in this balloon? You're going to fall in and you're going to get completely buried in 6 feet of snow, and I'm not going to dig you out. So just come back. You're going to fall over." But I have to say, I thought the picture was worth it just to get that angle and show it off to the best advantage. This is another picture, and it's almost an infrared effect. I'm coming to infrared in a moment. Again, it's Burita. These are mostly on Burita paper, but I love the light coming through the trees, and there's a sort of curve going in there, and you almost imagine it's going to go round again, and it's going to be an S curve. And the greatest landscape photographers of all time were M. Odell, and Horace Murch and people like that. And they used an S-curve. But if you want to really sound good, you don't call it an S-curve. You call it Hogarth's line of beauty. And then everybody will think you're very clever because you put in a special S-curve. But, you know, what you say about your pictures and what you actually show, you should be judged purely on what you actually produce. Now, I'm going to go into a totally different subject, because early this year, I went back many years to infrared, but I bought a ready converted DSLR converted to infrared, and I've spent the last 6 months playing with this camera, and I've had great fun, and it's kept me going. But nobody ever explains what effect infrared is going to have. One thing is that you focus at a different distance away because you're not photographing the subject with light, you're photographing it with infrared. But this is a picture of a gladioli in my garden against the fence, and I've converted it to monochrome. But what happens if you take it with the infrared camera? And that's what happens. You've lost the black in the centre, you've lost what you would think would be the sort of mid-greys, and you've almost produced it completely in the higher key. So you analyse that. You've got a lot more detail in the background, and you've got a greater depth of field in actual fact through infrared, and you've got a much darker background. That's not been messed about with. It's a straight print from the actual file of infrared. So you can actually change what looks like a normal picture simply by changing to this type of picture. And that one, I decided, another thing that you have as your choice in photography is how you present your pictures. So you put it into an oval shape and just simply print it with a clean white foreground, cut it out, and then put a slight key line around the edge of it. Whether you like that or not, you think it's twee or, but if you're making cards or something like that, it actually lends itself to that sort of thing. This is a willow tree, and this was taken less than 2 weeks ago. And the garden or the grounds of the hotel we were staying in had this biggest willow tree I have ever seen in my life. The inside of it was as big as this stand. It was absolutely incredible. And I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the only thing I didn't think of was putting anything on my feet. I went out in my pajamas on the figuring that nobody else would be mad enough to be walking around in the grass at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I had to pick my way through nettles on the ground. But that's the tree curtain behind the trunk of the tree. But the trunk of the tree comes out in monochrome, in dark tones, and the rest of it comes out in the light tones. And then, of course, the ground has not got any infrared because there are dead leaves on the ground and soil. And so you get this dark tone at the base. But when I was on my way to photograph the willow tree, I noticed that you could see the spire of a local church through the trees. So I took this picture, and it's got a cool tone on it. I slightly put a colder tone on it, which you can do, of course, because if you put a single colour on it, it's still monochrome. But what I love about that is it's turned all the leaves of the trees into a very highlight area. If you took that with ordinary light, they would be dark grey and it wouldn't be quite so dramatic or, for me, quite as attractive. But, photography is everywhere. Photographs are everywhere. You don't have to go miles to take them. And this is a local garden centre with a metal bull's head for sale in the garden amongst the plants. And I think that's quite dramatic. It's quite ridiculous. I mean, where the heck did I get that from? Well, it's dead, it's metal, and it's actually amongst the plants in the garden centre. But if you go into your own garden, I've got a statue in the garden, and I've actually produced this image, and I'd like somebody to suggest how I got that effect. That's a concrete statue in my garden. So why did I come out like that? And why did the leaves come out black? I reversed it. So it's a negative effect. So I simply flip it over into negative to get that effect. But I actually slightly used the shading to darken the eyes, and it's almost become weird and real, isn't it? I don't think I'll ever feel quite the same about that statue again, because I think it's quite creepy. But I don't know what I did. But, you can also change things if you want to. If you're going in for distinctions in travel or natural history or whatever, you can't change anything. But I met this lady abroad, and she was walking around a shopping centre surrounded by her friends. And she'd been growing her hair for 15 years. And that, believe it or not, is the length of her hair. And I went over to her and I said, please, can I photograph you? And I photographed her from the back and then photographed her from the side, cut her out, And later that evening, I watched some professional photographers taking pictures of people against this wall. And they'd got studio lighting set up and everything else on the wall. And they knew I was there. They said I could take pictures, which I did. And then I cut her out and stuck her there. And this is actually a window, sort of window grill in the wall. It's a very old wall. I don't know why people want to be photographed against that wall, but they do, evidently. So maybe that's my taste. But, you know, that's what you can do. Or you can wait to get dead lucky. And this is now going into a different paper finish. This is another one of my favourites. This is natural soft textured bright white. And that is actually a straight image. It's just been taken with a camera at the time. It does not work in colour. And the reason it doesn't work in colour, not only are they dressed in black and white, but these paving stones are bright red. And the colour red will assume an importance out of all proportion to its size. If I glance around here, do you know what I see? I see the gentleman at the back there with a nice smiling face in a bright red jumper. And I see the orange on this gentleman and you, but the red will always draw attention. And so it will demand more attention than the actual subject. So I converted it to black and white. And funnily enough, is one people actually like, which for me, I have to say, is unusual. Animals, would you like to take these down for me? Yeah, and those two, and put them on the bottom. Thank you, you're a darling. You can handle them and have a look at them by all means. Animals. One of the animals that really lends itself to monochrome, I believe, is an elephant. Is the elephants. And what I wanted when I went to Sri Lanka was an elephant coming towards me with his ears sticking out because they're so powerful and big. But there again, you analyse what you've taken, and the animal has rough hair. It's sort of like, you know, there's a roughness about it and there's a texture about it. So that is now on another one of my favourite papers, which is platinum etching. And if you feel that picture, it's actually got a rough finish on it. So it will bring out the texture. One of my most exciting experiences, was when we went to Borneo and we had the most amazing, can you take that end one off? Or put that in front of the end one. There, that's it, lovely. I knew I'd get a helper, and he's smiling. And what I went to see was wild orangutans in Borneo, and we got amazing luck. This orangutan, again printed on etching, was actually sitting on, it was up a tree, and I was photographing, and I was told it was coming down the tree to get back. And there was benches in front of me, and it sat on the back bench and put its finger to its lips as if to say, now, who the hell are you and what do you think you're doing? And all of a sudden, to my utter amazement, it jumped over every bench. And I'm not joking, it was as near as you are. And it just looked at me and put its finger to its lips. When he'd had a good look and a think about it, he got off the bench, walked down the aisle, past my husband and about 5 other people that had stayed despite the raining. And my husband was wearing shorts, and he was so close to my husband, he felt the hair, the fur, brush his legs. My husband is 5'4". That was 7 foot tall. And I'm not joking. And he said he was so stunned that he wasn't frightened at all. But there's other things you can do. You can pre-visualize what you see. This guy was a blind man, and he was actually, we were in a cow jam. We were stationary in the road, and he was right at the back, and I took a photograph of him. But the car I was in had a visor over the top of the window to keep the sun off, and the window was only partly down. And he came right up to the car window and he peered in at me. So I turned the lens to the widest angle and took that shot. But what I liked was this face of the man. But I didn't like the fact that that visor was covering that. So what I did was I cut the forehead off the top image because that was free of the glass. And I put the two things together and I made a print. Because why I took it was this bright orange beard. And when I made the print, I absolutely hated it. I don't think it works at all because he was a pretty dramatic face. So what the final image was, and this is printed on Burrito again, was this image taken from those two images that I originally started with. So you can lie through your teeth. But that's actually what I saw was the man free of the glass. I didn't see the glass until after I'd taken the picture. This is another one, and I put this one in because this is a tone picture, because it's one of the other choices that you have, and the presentation is a different presentation entirely, where you've got the whiteboard around the outside and the little girl looking over the thing. Actually, that's one of my most successful pictures, funnily enough. It got the Monochrome Print of the Year award with the PAGB. I don't know why, but it did. And this picture, there is a book of Fotospeeds. They've now made an e-book on printing. It's 150 pages, and it covers every possible aspect of making a good print. You can download it for free if you understand how they do it. And please do, because I had a look at it last night, and even I think it's quite good. And this is a picture that they used in that. Can you take those off? This is a picture that they actually used in that book. And when you analyse that, what's the most attractive part of the picture? Okay, it shows what the fella looked like, and he was absolutely gorgeous. He used to wake us up in the morning at 9 o'clock by playing this flute, which was a piece of bamboo with holes in it, outside the window of the mud hut that we were staying in Ghana. And he could play that thing, and he was absolutely fantastic. And I used to go and find him, and I sit on the ground, and he'd stand above me. And that's how I took this and play the flute. But what I remember were his hands on the flute. So maybe I should have not photographed in the whole of him, but just taken a picture of his hands playing his musical instrument, which is what it is. And I think that, quite honestly, hands and eyes are the most effective way of portraying a person that you photographed. And this is one, can you put that over the elephant? This is one of my favourite images. This was a man of 94. He was an old farmer. He was at an event in North Wales, and I am Welsh. I don't speak very much Welsh, and unfortunately he didn't speak very much English. So the conversation we had was rather strange. But the great Joan Wakelin, who was the most wonderful portrait photographer and people photographer I believe that ever lived, she used to say, you have to laugh with a person and cry with a person, only then can you portray their character and get close enough to photograph them. And that is taken, would you believe, with an 18mm lens. I was pretty close. So you really have to get to know people. So another choice that you have is format. And another thing that photos do is that they sell panorama paper. Panorama's in, as is square, and that's just a different format. This is taken from a full-size shot, and he is actually standing at the far end of this building that he was clinging onto. But I cut him out and just did it as a vertical panorama. But I'd like to ask you all a question. I don't need you to verbally answer me. I want to ask you, why do you take pictures? Do you take pictures to get a distinction? Do you take pictures to be praised in a camera club competition? Do you take pictures to please everybody else? No, you don't. You take the pictures to please yourself. And if it pleases you, then it works. And you see, that man called me into his house to show me his family pictures. And those were his memory. He couldn't speak any English. He couldn't tell me about them. But he was so proud of his family and the record he had of the members of his family that it moved me. They were his most precious possession, his photographs. So I've actually done it, converted it to monochrome, but I've actually left his face and his shirt in colour, because I think he was the colourful character, but the rest of it was a memory. And, you know, I saw this boy with his friend, and this little boy was actually holding a pet fox, as was his mate. And they were in the street. They came running up to the car I was in, and they wanted sweets or something like that. And they held these foxes up at the window, clutching them by the four legs. And I took a photograph, but I was in the Sahara Desert. And that night we had to sleep on an animal skin in a Berber tent on the sand, would you believe? And I didn't get any sleep. So I thought all night about these boys. And I asked the driver the next day, could he find one of them? And he found one on the road with another mate who didn't have a fox, at the side of the road, waiting for coaches and things to pass so he could show the people in the coaches his fox. And I said, drive up, carry on, and drop me off. And he said, I'll come with you, the guy said. I said, no, you won't. I'm going on my own. And I sat down on the desert floor and I played with the fox for about a quarter of an hour and watched him watch me, and he sat with me as well. And then I said, stand up. And he stood up, and I said, hold the fox in your hand. And he did. I said, no, closer, up a bit, stop. And I took this picture. And at that moment, I knew why I took photographs, because to me, that was a magic moment. But here's the crunch. They say, if you take photographs of somebody, you steal their soul. You don't steal their soul, but you look into their soul. And you can capture the soul of a child if you look into their eyes. And what I felt I'd caught was the soul of the boy, and looked into the eye of his fox. But when I made the picture, and you can come up and look at it closely, I'm reflected in that child's eyes. And that's the magic of photography. So thank you for listening to me. Diolch yn fawr.